We appreciate you participating in this important democratic process to hold the Liberal government accountable, as is our duty as His Majesty's official opposition. So thank you again for being here today. I want to ask you a question briefly about your report. I'm sure you're aware there have been multiple Beijing police station operating at various locations across Canada for the purpose of intimidating Chinese Canadians, students from China studying here, and to silence their democratic right to debate and freely criticize foreign governments. And I was disappointed, however, to see that that was not included in your report. Can you explain why?
Madam Chair, the activities of the workstations are nefarious, widespread here in Canada and here in other jurisdictions. They are the subject of RCMP investigation, which is a rather unusual situation. And because of that investigation going on and oversight activities, we felt it was appropriate to see that investigation through.
Thank you for your answer. I do feel, though, however, that it is warranted and certainly encompassed in the foreign interference sphere that has been talked about quite a bit, and I see that you're nodding in agreement, so I appreciate that. But I do feel that leaving it out does feed into a bit of the perception of bias that has been a criticism of this report and of you leading the report, in the sense that has been a failure of the Liberal government to drag its feet on bringing forward the Foreign Registry Act, Agents Registry Act, which would be the vital tool needed to hold those accountable operating these illegal Beijing police stations that are a very clear violation of our sovereignty, a slap in the face to all Canadians. And yet the tool we need to hold those accountable who are responsible for this, again, the Liberal government has dragged its feet for a number of years. I do feel, sir, that that would have been a well-placed criticism within this report, but there were very few, if any, criticisms of the current Liberal government in the report. And I found that concerning as well, that you had left out the Trudeau Foundation, given the leaked report from CSIS that $140,000 had been given through various channels from the Communist Party of China to the Trudeau Foundation, which CSIS said in the leak through a wiretap was found to have been donated for the express purpose of influencing Justin Trudeau, who would ultimately become the Prime Minister. So again, not including that as well leads to perception of bias, sir, whether warranted or not. That certainly, I think, is a valid perception that many people beyond the Conservative Party have pointed out. And I do feel, sir, that, and again, I appreciate that you do not see a conflict of interest with Justin Trudeau or the Trudeau family, but I do have to point out that it is not normal or common, certainly, in Canada, that people are friends with Prime Minister's sons, that people have dinner with them, that people go skiing with them. I am a McGill graduate, sir, and I appreciate that you were also at McGill, but you mentioned several times that you ran into Justin Trudeau at McGill, that you saw him there. I can tell you, when I was at McGill, I didn't know who the president was, let alone run into him or her on multiple occasions. So I do feel that perhaps there is, because of your long career and your service to Canada, but you have very clear connections to a very elite group of what some call Liberal insiders that perhaps you don't recognize. And that has provided a very clear perception of bias with your appointment, sir. Whether rightfully or wrongfully, I do feel that that perception, that those who hold them for good reason in this regard. And ultimately, sir, while the report is extensive, it does really downplay a lot of the concerns and the leaks that we have seen from reputable journalists in the Globe and Mail. It denies certain ones, it calls certain other ones false, that the conclusions were false. You are quite critical, though I do appreciate that you don't see it this way, but this report, sir, is quite critical of media and their discussion of these leaks in the news to tell the public. It is also quite critical of the Conservative Party and the way that we've held the government accountable upon learning on these leaks. And yet, again, it is not very critical at all of the Liberal Party, despite the fact that they have really not held anyone accountable for the police stations, for the intimidation of MP Chong, MP O'Toole, MP Kwan, MP Chu, for the targeting of the Conservative Party of Canada. In fact, the one diplomat expelled would not have been expelled if those leaks had not happened, and yet there is nothing critical about the lack of action to hold anyone accountable for these things in this report. So, sir, I respectfully to you and through the chair, I do feel that the perception of bias is warranted both in the report and given your history with the Trudeau family. And certainly I will just conclude, Madam Chair, that I urge you to respect the will of Parliament, Mr. Johnston, in 3 votes calling for a public inquiry, and that you respect the will of Parliament in honourably stepping down following that. Thank you, Mr. Johnston.
First of all, with respect to no criticism of the government, the report goes into quite considerable detail to say we have a system of dealing with foreign interference that is not working, and point out a number of the areas of defects. Have welcomed the initiatives that have been taken, such as working to now establish a foreign agents registry, which would put that in the public realm. That's been a matter that has had to study because it's got pros and cons, but I think there's action on that. That's very encouraging. With respect to friendship and acquaintances and so on, you suggested that somehow my realm of friends is senior.
Well, we'll continue with Mr. Singh. 10 minutes.
Chair and Madam Chair, through you, I would like to thank Mr. Johnston. Thank you for appearing today. And thank you for appearing to discuss the report. I want to lay out just a couple of opening statements, just so it's clear. You've also addressed the question, but I want to make it clear as well. I've made it clear that I disagree with your finding that there should not be a public inquiry. I believe there should be a public inquiry. And I think that is the only way to really restore public trust and confidence in our electoral system. And last week, we passed a resolution in the House, and you alluded to it, but I also want to say that we recommended that you step down as Special Rapporteur for the very specific reason, given the appearance of bias. And I made one concrete example, that it is, to a reasonable person, it would seem that there is a clear appearance of bias. The fact that the lead counsel repeatedly donated to the Liberal Party and attended a fundraiser with the Prime Minister as late as 2021, that this appearance of bias to a reasonable person would undermine the work that you're hoping to do, and that work cannot be achieved because of the appearance of bias, which is so fundamental. I am also disappointed that you rejected the majority vote, that the will of the House was expressed, and you rejected that vote. I think that's disappointing. But I want to use my time.
Mr. Therrien, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Democracy is under threat, and we have to ensure that the population has trust in this democracy. The population at 72% is asking for an independent public inquiry, and the House of Commons, as a majority, has asked for a public independent inquiry as well. Several experts are calling for this, and there are certain experts who are not asking for that at the beginning, but they've been convinced by Mr. Johnston's report and have joined their voice with the experts asking for the public independent inquiry. That's the only way when we can get the necessary documents to understand this foreign interference and limit it. It's the only way in which we can meet with the victims of interference in camera. What Mr. Johnston is proposing are public hearings where we're not obliging people, we're inviting victims, and certain victims have already said they will not come. Of course, it's less costly, his proposal. But how much does it cost to have a healthy democracy? Mr. Johnston said it would be quicker, but unfortunately I think this will be shoddy work. It will be quicker, but it won't shed light. It's so fast that he hasn't met with Mr. Stéphane Perrault, who is the Director of Elections, and the Chief Election Officer, Caroline Sima. When we talk about something being done fast, I think we're saying that it's just been half done. We have to have a public independent inquiry. That is what democracy is asking for, and the House and the population. Mr. Johnston is talking about protecting democracy, but he is not respecting democracy. Madam Chair, I think that unfortunately his nomination is a case of bad casting. He has to step aside for the good of everyone. Thank you.
I have no response, Madam Chair.
I think I appreciate that. Mr. Julian, 2.5 minutes.